I'd like to share a story with you. It's a story I've shared so rarely over the last 3.5 years that I can actually count the number of times I've told it in its entirety and with total honesty on my 2 hands. It's the story of how I got to be sitting here on Gaston Stage with all of you today. Now, I suppose in actuality, this story starts 23 years ago, but that version is long and winding, includes a lot of growing pains, and far too many awkward years of overusing hair gel to really get into it today. The story I'm here to share starts in early April of 2010, and while it still includes quite a bit of growing pain, I can thankfully and safely say it involves no horrifically crimped curls. Curly girl problems. On that day in early April of 2010, I received some of the most exciting news of my senior year. I was accepted to Georgetown University. Georgetown. Before believing it, I refreshed my internet and refreshed my internet and refreshed my internet just to make sure there wasn't a mistake. It was around the 5th or 6th time that it finally began to feel real. I immediately ran out to my parents, laptop in hand, jumping up and down. "I got into Georgetown," I screamed through my shocked laughter. It was an amazing moment. I felt complete relief, like I could breathe for the first time since sending out my application months before. I began to imagine myself on campus. The classes I would take, science and pre-med of course, the clubs I would join, maybe I'd get back into ballet, the friends I would have, energetic and passionate and accomplished. But if truth be told, it wasn't long before I began to worry about the immense life change that I was headed towards and how I was going to deal with it all. Away from my family, away from my friends, away from everything that I had ever known and loved. But oh, how little I knew. Fast forward 10 days after I received my acceptance letter. I woke up with the most intense pain in my back, and I struggled to catch my breath. With each passing moment, I lost sensory and then motor control over my entire body. First my fingers, then my arms, my abdomen and my back, next my hips, my legs, my feet, my toes. Within 15 minutes, I was paralyzed from the chest down, just like that. I was utterly confused and absolutely terrified. And was it not for the harsh reality of calling out to my baby sister to have her ask my mom to call 911, I would have sworn I was dreaming. What was happening? What was going on? One day I was celebrating the accomplishments of many years of hard work, relishing in the pride of a prestigious acceptance. And the next I was being transferred between hospitals in hopes that somebody would figure out the medical mystery that I had become. Turns out I had acquired an autoimmune disease called Acute Transverse Myelitis, where my own antibodies had attacked my spinal cord and first caused swelling and then demyelization of my spinal nerves. Essentially, the messages from my brain weren't being carried anywhere below my chest, and the messages from below my chest weren't being carried up to my brain. I was devastated and scared and frustrated. My thoughts of college classes and academic clubs and new friends evaporated as I refocused all my energy on basic, rudimentary tasks. Breathing on my own, sitting up in bed, raising my arms, retraining my voice to be louder than this breathy whisper. I spent the next 8 months between rehabs and hospital centers, and then the next 2 years of my life trying to regain enough strength so that I could move and live more independently. In fact, that's a mighty steep mountain that I continue to fight my way up, even still today. Despite what I like to call my time off, I never lost sight of my dream of going away to college. Admittedly, the dream felt less realistic on some days, but I fought really hard to get here because, honestly, I wanted to go away to college for all the same reasons that any other 17-year-old wants to go away. Freedom, experience, adventure, fun. Of course, when I did finally get to Georgetown, these weren't exactly the enthusiastic feelings I was having. I was 2 years post an illness that rocked my world in the most unexpected and unforgiving way. It left me confined to a wheelchair and totally unsure about my future. I thought I'd be nervous walking onto campus. Now, I was rolling on. And it was like all those freshman new student nerves were magnified times 10. What would be my role here? Would I be accepted? How would people perceive me? And most importantly, how on earth was I going to manage all these hills? I wish I could say I was okay with it all, but I was neither cool, calm, nor collected during my first few months here. I had no idea what I was doing. Since getting sick and being in a wheelchair, I didn't spend one night away from my parents. I hadn't independently pushed myself successfully for a distance longer than my home street. I hadn't made one new friend who didn't know me from before getting sick, and that meant, very significantly, that I hadn't had to explain my story to anyone who didn't already know some sense of it. When I first started speaking with you, I admitted that I don't often tell this story very freely or with total honesty. If anyone ever asked, I usually said something to the effect of, yeah, so I got this strange autoimmune disease at the end of my senior year that left me paralyzed from the chest down, but I'm honestly doing fine. I'm so much better than I was when I first got sick, and anyways, because I had to take some time off, that's why I'm 2 years older than everybody else. As if anyone noticed or cared that I happened to be a little old for my grade. There's an element of bravado that exists in our society, and in particular here on Georgetown's campus. There's a tendency to play down loss, to minimize disappointment, to squander notions of failure. It can be difficult to allow yourself to experience those emotions. In fact, even as I prepared what I was going to share with you all today, I found myself cutting out parts of my story and editing other sections in hopes that I could make it a little less raw. It wasn't until my third or fourth draft that, with some persuasive words from friends and mentors, I was convinced to let it all out. I am talking about taking risks after all. Too often we'd rather present our lives as these perfectly wrapped packages with crisp, clean edges and a big red bow on top. I mean, heaven forbid a little bit of our messy past poke through, and we have to concede to not actually knowing it all. I know this is why I never admitted the full extent of my story to most of the people I met. It left me vulnerable and exposed, and it shed light on the fact that my life involved struggle. I felt like I couldn't let others see the truth that maybe I didn't have it all together. There was never any mention of the fact that the day I got sick wouldn't be the worst of it, and I would have to get much sicker and suffer many more compounding medical complications before I would begin my slow fight back. There was never any mention of the fact that being at Georgetown was the first time in my life when I felt really, truly alone. And there was definitely never any mention of the fact that the reason I got up every morning was because I couldn't even bear to consider the alternative. I knew what the risk of being here meant. It meant that I could realize just how much more I depended upon my parents' physical presence for support than I was willing to admit. It meant that I could realize just how much more physically weak I was than I pretended to be. It meant that I could realize that to break into friendship circles and reveal who I am and all that my story included would be more of an emotionally draining process than I ever imagined possible. In my world, the risk I took coming here was blatant and obvious and knowing. Being here meant I could fail. I knew that if I couldn't get myself to be here, present mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, that I wouldn't just fail, but I would fail hard, because I couldn't take any more disappointment in my life, and I didn't want anyone to know that. But I survived. I could make a joke and say I've miraculously made it to senior year, but it wasn't a miracle that got me to where I am today. It was a lot of grit, a lot of determination, a lot of tears, a lot of laughs, a lot of faith, and a lot of willingness to surrender to my boundaries, knowing full well that with some guidance and support, I could knock them down and overcome. When we don't admit the risks we take, we undercut our accomplishments. We reduce the joy and pride of what it means to succeed in the face of adversity, to come out on top against all odds. Because if we never feel the hurt of failure, then by what measure could we use to feel the fulfillment of success? Let's change the norms of how we approach risk, because this isn't just my story, but it's yours too. Maybe English is your second language. Maybe being at Georgetown means you have to work 3 jobs to help pay for tuition. Maybe this is the first time you've left an insular religious community to study within a diverse one. Just because your risk is less visible than mine doesn't mean it's any less present. Risk-taking comes in all shapes and sizes, but one thing I know for sure is that risk-taking is brave, because risk-taking means opening yourself up to the possibility of experiencing loss, feeling disappointment, and coming face to face with failure. When we approach a situation fully knowing the potential to fail, we can fully experience the moment when we succeed. Now, I feel the need to emphasize that while I'm using language like success and succeeding, I'm not just talking about the moment when you reach the mountaintop or when you cross the finish line. I definitely don't caution you to reserve your right to celebrate until the end of your journey, because where's the fun in that? I'm talking about a success in your lived experiences, a success in the fact that you made a choice to get up, show up, live through it, and well, keep rolling on. I still have a few months left before graduation, so my time at Georgetown hasn't come to an end yet, thank goodness. But even still, when I reflect upon where I am today and where I started, I celebrate the fact that I took a risk coming here. I realized that I could live without my parents just fine, and maybe even enjoy myself while I'm at it. I realized that I could get myself up, down, and around this campus, hills be damned. I realized that I would actually make friends, and that in sharing my story like I'm doing today, I would realize more about myself than I ever dreamed possible. You want to talk about high risk and high reward? I didn't think I would make it through my first week. I cried to my dad all through dinner one night saying I couldn't ever imagine this place becoming my home. And now, I get teary-eyed when I think of leaving in May. I've made friends that I will have for life. I've come to know my strengths in profound ways. I've learned that without risk, you can only go so far, and that the real adventure, daunting and complicated and unknown, exists beyond the threshold of security blankets and safety lines. Allowing yourself to take a risk means allowing yourself to fail, but it also means allowing yourself to succeed in unimaginable ways that will forever change the discourse of your life. This is a lesson worth learning, one that I'm proud to understand firsthand, and one that I'm honored to share with you all today. So thank you.